Hello everyone, and welcome to the next video in the behind the scenes series. This time we're going to take a look at Dread. This one is also from some time ago, but there's still elements in there that even after all this time are still one of my favorites that I created. So I would like to show you how I did it back then. I say back then because some of the techniques are a bit outdated. Some elements are way more easily created now because of certain updates. But I hope you will still enjoy this video. So here we go. The first element that I created was the mirror. Here you can see one of the earliest prototypes of it. It's already working, but it's not quite the one that I used in the final version. The final version is a lot slower than this one and also unbanked. Because of the banking and the speed, you didn't quite see what was happening, so I slowed it down. A lot of people ask me how I created this, and I mean most people understand that it's two cards just heading towards each other. But the main question was how do I time it right? And although this one is working, it's not perfect. Mainly because it was not going to be the first element that you see when you write it. Which means you have to be able to implement this one later on. So if you put a whole lot of track before this, it still has to work. And with this version that's actually quite tricky to achieve. What I mean with that is, if you take a look at the start of this track, you see that it's actually very slow and then accelerates into about 56 miles per hour. And on the other side, however, it's already at about 52 miles per hour. Which means that if you want to implement this one into an existing track, so if you have a whole lot of track here, and you want this one to work as well, you have to make sure that it slows down to that speed and accelerates up back to 56 miles per hour. It does work, but it's not quite what you want, because of how hard it is to implement it later on. So I used kind of a different technique here. What I did was make sure that when it's at a certain position, it's at a certain speed, and on the opposite side it's also on that same speed at the same position. That way, when you implement it later on, all you have to do is make sure that the speed on which it enters is the same as the speed you set before. And here you can see how I set up the track to have the cards be at the same column on opposite sides. How I did that was have a whole lot of boosters and brakes all over the track between the two opposite sides. So the first thing I did was set the minimum departure interval to match it as close as I can. As you can see here, 15 seconds gets it pretty close, but not quite yet. It's just a bit too early over here. So to adjust for that minor desync, you can use the boosters and brakes. So for example, to make sure that it's just a little bit later over here, I can adjust this one, the deceleration rate, a bit higher, so it brakes a little bit harder, which makes the car enter just a little bit later. Let's see if that worked. Well, now it's a bit too late again, so you adjust it again. Let's say on 11. So this way you can keep adjusting, and if you have multiple places where you can adjust it, those minor changes will make it work. That's pretty good. So as you can see, it's quite a task to have that set up, but the effect was just too good to not do the work. Now the next thing I want to show you is the Funhouse Horror House color trick, which is probably the most characteristic element of Dread. I think the best way to show it is by using a white light. You can actually see what's going on. It's made up of three colors, red, green and blue, with the background color of white, which actually matters because otherwise it's not gonna work. Because what you do is mixing colors to hide colors. What I mean with that is, for example, if I change this floodlight to red, then the red letters are gonna disappear. That's because if you put a red light on a white background, that white background is only going to reflect the red light, which means it will become red. And because the letters are red as well, those letters are going to dissolve into the background, which is now the same color as the letters. And the same goes obviously for green. As you can see here, if you don't have the perfect RGB values, the letters are not going to disappear. That's because the white background will change color, but because it's not the exact same color as the letters are still going to be visible. Anyway, it's still really fun to mess around with stuff like this. This technique might be a bit outdated, but on the other hand, updates that make certain techniques outdated also create a load of new possibilities, which I will be happy to experiment with. I also wanted to have a quick look at this one, just because I really enjoy the simplicity of it, but it still has a great effect. Just by being in the dark and having a dim light on it, and by adding certain sound effects, it's really creepy, even though it's just a stroller. It's nothing too special, but it still works very well, so I was really happy with that. Another one in that same category, where it's just really simple but really effective, is the escape of the boogeyman, which you can see here. Just that small puff of smoke with the right sound effect works just perfectly. And the same goes over here for when the boogeyman extinguishes this fireplace. It's a couple of smoke bursts with the right sound, and with simple things like this you can really create a creepy atmosphere. It might be a bit of a cliche, but I do believe that a lot of times less is more is exactly what you need. A lot of the stuff that I create is thought of in advance, but sometimes you just stumble upon effects. And the boogeyman is an example of that. I was creating something entirely different and suddenly there it was. I was trying to create an element that sort of creates a fade in or a fade out effect. I actually used this in the dream sequencer. To create that effect I used oil jets right next to each other. And by doing that you create a black screen. But how the oil jet works is, if you get close to it with the camera, it doesn't matter if you're in a cart or just like this, the oil will disappear, but gradually. This way you can make a transition that is not a door and also not as sudden as going through a wall, for example. But while I was building this I put one of the jets on the wrong position, and because of the certain angle I was in, it suddenly looked like a hooded figure of some kind. And seeing I was building a spooky coaster called Dread, a horror coaster, I thought, well, that just might work perfectly. So if I just put the oil jet a bit higher than the two others, then there you have it. There's the boogeyman. And this happens on occasion, and it's just really fun when you discover stuff like this. Now I did get the question if I have the music before I create it or if I put the music on it afterwards. The way I do it is I create the ride first, then find proper music, and then I go back to the ride to change the final things to really match the music. For example, over here at the end in the cave, I added those boogeymans to match the final impact sounds on the song. So it's really an interaction of both between music and ride. Anyway, I think that also wraps it up for this video. If you liked it, please subscribe, and if you want to support me even further, you can go to the Patreon link in the description below and become a Patreon, which will really help me to put even more time into this, to create these kind of videos, but also to work on new rides as well. So thank you, and I will see you next time. See ya!